James Harden, Derek, Mr. Sixers fan. How did you react when you found out James Harden opted in and requested a trade from your Philadelphia 76ers?
Yeah, I was a little surprised. I thought there would be stronger negotiations. I thought thought Houston honestly would make a bigger push than they ended up making for James Harden. So that would have, driven the conversation a bit more. But I wasn't surprised, I guess, by the result, given that Harden was asking for 4 years, which Philadelphia was never prepared to do, and, still wanted some legit money to be compensated with. Gifted, you know exactly how I feel about James Harden. I was excited to get Ben Simmons off my team. I wasn't in love with Harden. I acknowledge and respect his talent as an individual basketball player. I don't think his play style and decision making is enough to get you over the hump if he's expected to be a first or second option in a high level playoff or final situation. And really, that's what it came down to last season. He is certainly not to blame for, losing to the Celtics altogether. There's plenty of fingers that are to be pointed at other guys in other situations. But at the end of the day, I'm not thrilled about having trouble dealing James Harden now, simply for the fact that this trade dictates not only Joel Embiid's future with the Philadelphia 76ers, but really the Philadelphia 76ers future as a whole. Because if you cannot hit a home run on this trade, it is, essentially you're looking down the barrel of a rebuild once again. Because realistically, this season, whether Harden's here or not, you got to ride it out with whatever roster you have this season. Chances are it's not going to be as good as it was last year, barring some remarkable stuff. And then Embiid has a decision to make, because once we are fully into this new CBA, and teams now are kind of like have a much better idea of what cap looks like, what they can and can't do, and really what their situations are, the whole league will essentially be looking for Joel Embiid services at that point. He's on a contract that is not disgusting given his talent level. He's in his prime. He does everything super well on both sides of the basketball. A lot of teams would be interested. And a lot of teams would have a package, whether it's like star level talent, draft compensation, just the money to alleviate Philadelphia's issues. So overall, it's an interesting spot to be in. I'm a little stressed given the circumstances, but I don't think it's the end of the world yet, because Harden hasn't said Miami or bust, which is something Dame recently did, or at least an article was published suggesting that Dame said that. So thankfully, Harden hasn't said LA or bust yet, because that would skewer Philadelphia's chances to really make this work.
Yeah. With James Harden asking out, just seeing how they played against the Celtics, and, although him winning game 1 and I think it was game 4, pretty much by himself, if the team can't produce another win or another 2 wins to get past that team, although the Celtics, you could say, were better, that still puts a very bombastic side eye on that team. And if I was Joel Embiid, I don't know how many years he's been with the 76ers. What, 7 years, almost 8 years at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that he's getting a little tired of the shenanigans and the roster changes, and then hitting the same road. Another roster change, hitting the same road. Somebody's acting out. Ben Simmons, okay, it's this big fiasco. We get somebody else. We get James Harden. We still getting out at the same spot. So I can definitely see him getting a little fatigued in the next year or two. I don't want to say that he's going to axe out, but I can definitely say that at some point, if they don't basically get to the finals, he's going to have some choice words for him. But yeah, back to James Harden. I feel like he can plug in with any team. I know the money is a little bit tricky because he makes a lot, and I think he's worth the money. But that playoff success with him and just the durability in the playoffs is the biggest thing that I've been very iffy with James Harden with in general. Pretty much since he got in Houston. You know, just seeing him go against the Spurs and then seeing him go against the Warriors those couple of times, especially when, you know, even Chris Paul getting injured, missing 27 threes in a row as a team. Those type of things add up, and especially this year, that last game of the season for him, or the playoffs, excuse me. Just seeing those type of things can prove worrisome for a lot of teams, but I'll take the risk if you don't have anybody else and you have the money, or maybe you have the assets to match up for him. I'll say take that risk, but I want to ask, what team would make the most sense for James Harden being on there?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think the obvious answer is the Clippers. I think the Clippers are prepared to go all in. They have Kawhi and PG on the last years of their deals. They both have $40 million player options the following season. But even more importantly, Ballmer and LA have a new stadium to unveil next season. And they have 3,000 toilets for some reason. And it's apparently very expensive, and they're looking to try and go as big as possible. So getting a James Harden, a third star on that team, and saying this is title or bust, there's nothing else that matters, makes a lot of sense, because Harden answers all the questions that this Clippers team has had, barring the health. But again, that's everyone's problem, right? Everyone's got that same injury bug they're trying to avoid. So Harden, PG, and Kawhi, you've got two of the best wing scorers in the league. Both can play elite defense when it matters. Harden can handle all of the playmaking and still be a dynamic scorer. That sounds really good on paper.
Don't forget about Russ either. He just signed to a $8 million contract.
Yeah, and I'm sure ESPN will say that Russ is going to be a starter. But, you know, like, exactly. Like, you have guys that even if they trade a bunch to Philly to make this deal, or a third team gets involved, they'll still have bodies to make work. And I think they can still make a really competitive roster outside of their own big three in this circumstance. So, like, they make the most sense. As someone who's not a firm believer in James Harden, for, like, you know, kind of the same things you mentioned, Kai, like, you know, the durability is a question mark. His lack of changing play styles is really my biggest concern. And, you know, I've been validated in that concern over the past 2 seasons he's been here. That's not changing. He's a really good regular season player, and that deserves credit. Like, he had, you know, all-star level play from the season he played. But it doesn't change in the playoffs. And if your team gets so used to that same play style, all of a sudden defenses care now more than they did in the regular season, and it's much harder, and Harden doesn't adapt, and then you lose. So anyone else, I really don't know. Like, Toronto, who has no idea what they're doing yet, doesn't really make a ton of sense to me, although I'd love to poach some of their players. Portland, as silly as Portland has been for the better part of Dame's entire tenure, I don't think they want to get into the James Harden situation. And Miami, I think they're just too scared to do that. Like, if Dame didn't work out and he goes to Brooklyn or something else, I don't think they'd be interested in like swapping. And I also have no interest in Tyler Hero, so that doesn't work for Philly either. So I don't really know what more he's holding out for. Houston already spent all their money, so he's not going there. It feels like Clippers are bust. Morey's just playing the long game. And then as far as, like, the Clippers have players I'm interested in, like, it's not ideal because I don't think we're getting Paul George out of it as much as I'd like. But that's the only end I see right now for this Harden situation.
I think for me, what makes this such an interesting trade request is James Harden demanding a trade to the Clippers. I think it fits very well. And it's funny because how I view it, right, is the question mark on the Clippers every year has been what? Health. Can Kawhi stay healthy? Can Paul George stay healthy? And they traded all of those picks for Paul George and Kawhi, and they traded a All-NBA player in Shea, right? So to me, it makes the most sense to go all in right now while those guys are still playing at optimal levels, because even though it was only for 2 games, when you saw Kawhi in those 2 games, Kawhi was absolutely outstanding, could not be stopped, phenomenal scorer. and there was no Paul George for that entire series. And I promise you, versus the Suns, if they were healthy, they would have beat them in 5 or 6 to me, like easy. Like that's how confident I am in what that roster was. But now you keep Westbrook as another playmaker who can play a role, and now you have James Harden as the half-court playmaker. So now there's many different variety lineups to where, okay, Westbrook and Paul George, you two together lead this lineup. Okay, Harden and also Kawhi, they play more slow. You guys lead this lineup. Like there's multiple different types of versatility. Not to mention they just got Kenyon Martin for 2 second-round picks, who is another great athlete that just runs the floor. And I think the biggest issue last year is the Clippers wanted to play different styles, but they had so many older players who didn't run. I mean, Russ had many plays where the only other Clipper running with him up and down the court would be Paul George at times, and honestly, Terrence Mann. Covington is not running. Marcus Morris is not running. So now adding in more athletes and more playmakers, this gives them the best shot that they've had to actually win. So I actually like the idea of Harden on the Clippers. Harden leaving Philly to me is very tough. I think no matter how you slice it, they're going to lose that trade ultimately. I know Daryl Morey is going to try his best to get as much value back, but my main issue is last year, James Harden was inconsistent in the playoffs. I agree. He had some very bad games that 100% needs to be addressed. But at the same time, James Harden at his best was phenomenal in the playoffs and actually won a lot of critical games against Boston. My problem is now that there is no James Harden to take any type of pressure off of a MVP, Joel Embiid, now the question becomes how competitive is that roster going to be without a second star player? I understand having more depth around Joel Embiid, but ultimately, the biggest game for James Harden that has to stand out is the game on the road without Joel Embiid, where James Harden led that team, put the team on his back, and secured one victory. If you X out James Harden from that equation, even if you have these pieces who fit well, who is going to lead the charge? Is it Maxey or some other player that you're getting back, Derek? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll quickly say there is a potential reality we're looking at where Harden is playing in Philadelphia this year. That was the other thing. Like, I think, I'm not saying it's likely, but I do think there is a chance you see Harden is stuck in Philly because Morey won't trade him, and Harden has to realize, like, he can't just sit out and destroy his, next contract hopes. He has to play basketball to some degree, or at least play long enough until Philly says, okay, we're in negotiations with somebody, we'll sit you, and then, we'll shop you, whatever. So there's the chance he plays, and then that changes everything. But the realistic, I'm using air quotes here, but I feel like the most realistic trade we'll see for Harden that involves the Clippers, I think involves guys that, aren't stars, but something I kind of drew up here. If LA, obviously refuses to give up PG, which wouldn't be a surprise, I think you could see James Harden and Furkan Korkmaz go to the Clips for Norman Powell, Terrence Mann, and Robert Covington. And you're not getting any stars back there, but the roster you fill out has 9 guys that you potentially are kind of interested in. Tyrese Maxey, Norman Powell, I think it's a decent backcourt. Maxey needs to take a leap regardless of circumstances. He has to grow in because now he's going to have more on-ball duties, and you just want him to grow as a player anyway. I think he's on that trajectory. I think he's gotten better every single season. Then you have Terrence Mann, who's super versatile. He'll plug in at the 3. I feel okay. Tobias Harris, we know what he is. I'm not thrilled with him being the third option again, but he'll also be playing for his next contract, so you would hope that means better decisions, and maybe he finds, a way to be a concrete shooter again. Joel, you need MVP caliber Joel if you want to do anything anyway, so no, nothing else. Off the bench, you've got DeAnthony Melton, who I think is awesome. He's one of the best role players in the NBA. Jaden Springer is the dark horse. I'm not going to say most improved, but the guy to take a jump for Philadelphia. He's been hooping in the G League. He's been doing extremely well in early offseason workouts with Nick Nurse and the team. He's buying in. He's a 6'5", really good athlete, terrific shooter with like amazing defensive intangibles. So he would be the awesome off guard to come off the bench in this circumstance. PJ Tucker's still here, but now he's off the bench where he should be. And Paul Reed, I think, is probably the best backup five Philly has realistically had in the Joel Embiid era. So that's a cool 9-man. It's not star-studded, but I think with a better coach that Philadelphia now has, maybe a better system buy-in and growth from a handful of players, you have a chance, a fighter's chance to contend in the East. I can't go any higher than that because the talent there's clearly a ceiling for the talent, but that's my best shot. And I think that's a realistic one.
Yeah, that was a great breakdown. Just looking at the roster, I'm trying to figure out how far they can go with even James Harden staying. I noticed not even just in this prior playoff run of the 76ers, but a lot of the playoff runs with James Harden, although he can catch fire at any moment and he can go off on his own, it almost seems as though the more he does for himself, the colder the guys around him kind of gets. Yes. So even if he, like I say, if he doesn't have the best game, he'll then look to his teammates, but they're not as much of a groove that he was. And now you're depending on him them. And then you have Embiid trying to, come back and be that very, very forceful paint force that we all know he can be, but he tends to stay more on the top of the key mid-range area and then works in. It just always seems like, okay, if James Harden is good, the rest of the guys are a little cold. So it's 50-50 chance, maybe a 25-75 chance that the rest of the guys can pick up as soon as he goes off. But it just seems like it's at the most unopportune times for the rest of his team. So I don't really see the 76ers going again past the conference finals, really. It just doesn't. Nothing really pops out for them. I love Maxey. Harris, I'm a little higher than most people are. I understand that, his downfalls definitely comes out at times that you necessarily wouldn't want him. But I think for the role that he plays, it's pretty good. PJ Tucker, perfect role player, corner, 3-point guy, defensive guy. And they have Patrick Beverly now, so that's a good force to have.
Oh, guaranteed playoffs now.
Oh yeah, guaranteed. Well, at least they're not, not a first round exit, so that's good. But yeah, honestly, I'm not too hopeful on the 76ers. I wish I was, but just seeing the resumes of the top two players on that team, it never really popped out like championship, especially them two together.
Yeah.
Almost, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. No, I agree. Look, there's no argument to really put up from that perspective. Pat Bev is on this team. As you can tell by my voice, I'm not very enthralled with that. I think he's a cool vet. I do think he can help a locker room at times. He and PJ Tucker, I'm sure, are going to be fun, but he's 6'1", and I don't think he has a shot at all anymore. So that doesn't help me. To me, look, I said this to Gifted, Kai, the fact that the Sixers were not able to re-sign Jalen McDaniels has really hurt me. Really, this free agency, almost more than the James Harden request and situation, just because I think, one, he was very cheap. Toronto got him for virtually nothing, but two, he was such a plug and play guy, one that you traded Matisse Thybulle and some draft capital for to avoid the luxury tax issues, but also for a prospect that could be here long term. Like, he's 6'9", really long, good athlete. He showed some offensive promise a little bit in Charlotte, and Charlotte's just a cesspool, so maybe he's talented and we just haven't been able to see it. But now we get no opportunity to see it. in Philadelphia. So not having him and him being like my 10th man to like really help like with the depth, like the one thing Philly struggled with so long in the Joel Embiid era, on top of a myriad of off the court nonsense, is not having a deep team. And I really was excited the prospects of a deep team in Philadelphia, but now we don't really have that. Again, barring some crazy stuff. Ayo Dosunmu is also still out there in free agency, and we'll pivot to free agency as the greater thing in a second. He's 6'5", so I automatically was more excited about him than Pat Bev. Honestly, this team doesn't need to get older. To me, it needs to get younger. So to put a bow on this, I think Philadelphia has a chance to improve as a cohesive team. I don't think that necessarily means a championship, as sad as that is to say. I agree with the both of you. It's understandable to have your doubts. I still have mine. As a fan, I'll still root for them. I'm excited by the new prospects, but I'm very aware of the situation we could be looking at the end of the season. Joel just said, I've had enough, barring really an Eastern Conference Finals berth. I mean, if you can't escape the second round again, James Harden or not, I think that's enough for Joel to just say, I'm going to pull the plug. It's been 10 years I've dedicated to the city, and we haven't gone far enough. And a lot of it's honestly not even on him at this point. At that point, it would just be, I've exhausted everything. So it's unfortunate. I hope we don't get to that circumstance. I think Philly's still exciting, at least in the hunt in a weaker East. But yeah, it's a tough situation for Philly.
Definitely a tough pill to swallow. I appreciate your breakdown of your team, Derek. And I guess the only right way to transition from your pain is to my pain. The Golden State Warriors signed Chris Paul, man.